Hey, what's up, world? Thanks for joining me. This is Jason. Welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about second shooters and what they are, how to become one, how I became one, and how I find second shooters today. So, uh, let's get started. Yep. Let me just adjust my little backrest because I have a bad back. All right. So, what is a second shooter? First of all, so a second shooter is basically what it is. It's a second shooter. So for large events such as weddings, you can't be at two places at the same time. So while the bride is getting ready, the groom is going to be getting ready. So you have a second shooter there to cover the groom while the main shooter is covering the bride. Main shooter covers the bride because it's the bride's day mostly for weddings, right? Let's face it. Let's be real. Um, Second shooter, it's all like real. Their responsibilities kind of come down to what the main shooter kind of delegates, yeah. So sometimes, um, in my own experience, when I do weddings, um, some of my second shooters are better at doing details than other things, or they might be better at doing group shots than details. So, I'll kind of like divvy up the responsibilities accordingly. So if, I have one photographer who's especially good at details, and I'll delegate all the details to that person, and I'll take care of like the other things. I'll pick up the slack from there, right? You're basically just kind of using people's strengths and utilizing their strengths and capitalizing on that and minimizing the weaknesses, right? And you're also doing the same thing for yourself. So there you go. That's what a second shooter does, basically. Helping the main photographer getting the angle, getting the different angles and different focal lengths. So that's basically what a second shooter is. How do you become? Why do I bring being a second shooter up? Well, because that's probably the best way of getting into the wedding industry and familiarizing yourself with, the wedding day, the actual day. A lot of people, unless you've been married a couple times, you're not gonna really be familiar with what actually goes on from the moment you wake up to the time you pass out, right? So, being a wedding photographer, you're behind the scenes, so you see how the sausage is. You're making the sausage. You're seeing how the sausage is made. You're actually helping make the sausage, right? So, um, if you're gonna be a wedding photographer and you don't know how the day goes, then you're making it much more difficult on yourself than you should be, or you're making it much more difficult on yourself than it has to be. Because the more familiar you are with the day, the more familiar you are with weddings as a template, for the most part, the easier your life is going to be. The more hours you're going to be able to sleep at night. Right? Um, how to become a second shooter? The simple answer to that question The simple answer to that question is basically cold calling or cold emailing. You find a bunch of studios, wedding photographers in your neighborhood, in your city, in your market, and you shoot them an email and let them know that that you're interested in becoming a second shooter and you're interested in learning the craft. And a lot of times, I feel like if you already are a wedding photographer, that's great that you have that experience. But at the same time, it's like you have experience with the workflow or the culture or the philosophy of a different studio, and not business that the owner is running themselves, right? So sometimes I feel like maybe it's more beneficial, or it could be more beneficial if the person is like, I don't know too much about weddings, but I would love to have the opportunity to learn from you and at the same time provide you with some amazing photos. Remember, um, you have to give them a reason for them to want to work with you, right? So if you just, if the email is like super dry and is like, hi, I'm Jason. I'm a photographer in your area. I'd like to be your second shooter. Please let me know if you have any, if you're looking for new members or blah, 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 blah. You know, it's like, if I get that email, I'm like, okay, cool. That's great. File it away, right? File it away mentally. And then 9 times out of 10, you're going to forget unless there's like the immediate need is there, right? Unless you're, unless I'm like, oh shit, I'm double booked and all my other photographers are, not available. And then it's like good timing, blah, 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 right? What else is there? Cold calling, emailing. I don't know how much success there is because cold calling and cold emailing, I think, just in general, is not a very highly efficient tactic. So, and that's the reason why I mentioned it first, because it's a long shot. It's not your best shot, but if it's your only shot, then that's your shot, right? Um, the second would be to kind of just ask your friends or ask your network. Go onto like LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram if you use any of those still, and ask your network if if they know anybody that knows anybody that knows anybody that's in the industry and could help you out. Because any kind of connection, the older I get, the more experience I get, the more I realize, it's all about connections, man. It's all about good timing and it's all about good connections. And then, obviously you have to like capitalize on that with skill, and, you have to follow through with a good product, obviously, right? In order to like retain that business or to keep that business sustainable. Um, yeah. Um, and then what else is there? You ask your network, or you ask your LinkedIn, your Facebook. Professor. There's a professor at UPenn. His name is Adam Grant. He's an author and a psychologist, and I had heard him speaking at an event, and this was an event that I'm photographing, and this is a part of like corporate photography that I love, is that a lot of it is very, um, it's stuff that I can kind of apply to in my own life, that I am able to kind of like partake, or like eavesdrop and listen into. And so this professor Adam Grant, Dr. Adam Grant, he wrote a book called Givers and Takers, and he discusses how you should cast a wide net in terms of like, if you need a favor, or if you're looking for a connection or a hookup or anything like that, cast a wide net, because the looser connection that you have with somebody, the more they're apt to help, um, and the closer you are to someone, the less likely they would be helpful, because not that they don't want to help, but the more you know somebody, the more you may like disqualify them, or um, think that they might not be interested in something, right? So your friends are going to be very specific in terms of like what they think you want, right? Meanwhile, people that don't know you well, they might just kind of like throw out like brainstorming. They might just throw out like ideas and suggestions and opportunities and things like that. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask people that like you met once in your life, or just make sure that you have a good relationship with them, or that you've had a good experience. That's why for me it's always like when it comes to like meeting new people, um, it's always important to be kind, right? Like Maya Angelou said, it's not what you do, it's not what you say, but it's how you make people feel, right? That's what people remember. When people don't remember you for what you did, they don't remember you for what you said, but they remember you for how you made them feel. And so, if you're networking properly and if you're raised correctly, then you're going to be kind to one another, and that kindness comes back, man. It's not just about like karma. It's not whether or not you believe in it. It's not karma. It's just what goes around does come around. You put that positive energy out there, and it might literally come around back, boomerang back to you from the exact same person 20 years down the line. You never know. Um, so there's that. Cast a wide net when you're asking your network, like on social media and things like that. And then you can ask friends directly as well. Ask friends, that are familiar with the industry, and by that I mean like ask your married friends, or ask your married friends, ask who they used, if they got along with them, because if they got along with them, you know, on the wedding day you know, they don't spend more time with anyone besides their wedding photographer. Like their hair and makeup's done in the morning. The pastor, bing bang boom, they're done in like 30 minutes. The DJs, they come and eat dinner, and then they, do their work, and then your videographers and your photographers are the ones that spend all day with you. So it becomes an intimate relationship at intimate in like the working sense. You get to know your clients, and the clients get to know you pretty well during that process. It's a pretty intense day, and there's a lot of responsibilities. And so if you can handle that, then I think it bodes well for your relationship in the future with your clients. And so you ask your friends that have gotten married, and ask them if they got along with their photographer, and how they thought they were, and maybe they can email their photographer and ask them to bring you aboard and whatnot. Um, I would say that's probably a pretty decent connection to have. Um, I know some of my clients have gotten into. I've had clients get in touch with me saying, asking if I can meet up with like their cousin, or like somebody that they know that was at the wedding, that they are interested in the industry, and I'm much more willing to meet with somebody like that. Mainly, not just because it's like good customer service. It's obligatory. I don't feel too obligated to meet, but it's a closer connection than just somebody that's just like emailing you out of the blue and is like could be crazy or something like that. It's like going out with a friend of a friend. It's dating like a friend of a friend. At least that person isn't like completely crazy, right? Same thing with photographers. If they're a friend of a friend, and that they're not completely irresponsible or whatnot, or that person wouldn't recommend you, right? Or you think ideally, maybe I'm just being naive. I don't know. Yeah. All right, part two: how I became a second shooter photographer, whatever. How I became a second shooter, right? So, I was working a corporate job as a paralegal in Big Law in New York City, and I was just going through what every late 20s guy goes through in New York, I guess, is an existential crisis, and basically I wanted to change careers, and photography was always something that fascinated me and interested me. I'll talk about that in a different video. But making money from photography was something that I wanted to do, rather than it just being a hobby, right? So um, I basically took about like a year to kind of really take my photography more seriously, to kind of like learn the craft more. I already had known a lot about the science of it and the technical aspects of photography, but I wanted to just like up my game in every level, in every aspect of the genre. So, I did take maybe 6 months to a year to like really not master the craft, but hone my craft and work on my portfolio. And it's difficult to work on your portfolio for weddings if you're not shooting weddings, right? So the photography I was doing at the time, hobby wise, was just street photography. And so I just basically was like, my portfolio will be the best street photography that I can provide, right? It'll be the best of my best. It'll be the best that I can do given what I can accomplish, right? And so I built up my portfolio and I started calling around to, a lot of my friends were getting married, right? Late 20s, New York. That's when all of my friends were getting married. So I was basically going to like one or two weddings every weekend for about like 2 years. And there would always be like the same, not the same photographers, but the same company, right? Like they, were dressed similarly. They always like mixed their photographer pairings, right? But but they became like familiar faces because I was seeing them literally every weekend, and so I would ask, and I wanted to work with those. So I figured I would work with those guys because they're very prolific and they had a lot of work. So a lot of work means they need a lot of photographers. It also means faster learning, and so I found out that and this was luck. There's a lot of luck to, um, there's a lot of luck to like switching careers or like entering a career. And this was one of my bits of luck where the owner of that company uh, was actually friends with somebody that I had gone to college with. So this is like an instance of like a small world. So I had actually lived with this guy. He was my housemate in college for about a year and a half or 2 years or so, and his name is Jin. Um, he was a good friend of mine, and I knew that he had gone to grad school for photography, and he was friends with the owner of this wedding studio, and so I kind of emailed him, and I was like, Jin, what's going on? Blah blah blah. How's everything? I'm actually going. I'm thinking of like changing um, careers and going into photography, but mostly like wedding photography, right? So, um, I was like, Jin, do you know any? You don't know anybody that went to, or like, you don't know anybody that's in the business, right? Knowing full well that he did, right? And so, thankfully, you know, he was like, yeah, I actually do. This guy, blah blah blah. Give him a call. I'll send him an email and I'll let him know that you're gonna be getting in touch. Blah blah blah. So I was like, wow, fantastic. Like, everything like fell into place. So I reached out and I was like, hey, we have this mutual friend. I think you know him. Blah blah blah. I'm interested in and becoming a photographer, and I would love to learn from you guys because I love your photos and I think I got an email like later that day, um, pretty quickly after asking me to come in and show them my portfolio. This was I guess every before everything was like really digitized, so I still had a physical portfolio, and so um, I went in, interviewed with them, and I started shooting with them like on the weekends as actually like a third shooter. I was actually barely shooting during the day. I think they paid me like $50 to be there just for my time. And I was basically there just kind of like witnessing how it works, how the photographers work, and the angles that they were taking, and the techniques and the strategy. So it was actually really, it was a very good step by step, or like not step by step, but like baby steps, um, a good baby step way of you know going into it. It was a baptism by fire because this was a studio that basically did like 200 weddings a year, and like double booked, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday weddings. So these guys were pretty prolific. And so, there was a lot of learning, a lot of fast learning, and soon enough, I became a second shooter, and then they, strictly as a freelancer, and then after a while, they wanted me to become their kind of like social media blogger slash photographer slash office worker, whatever, right? So I quit my full time job, and then I decided to work in the studio full time, and then I worked with them for a couple years and started my own studio. And so look, it's a completely different story from there. So, but that's basically how I became a second shooter. I just kind of bobbed left and right, bobbed left and weaved right, to kind of um, like kind of like weasel my way in through the door to get into the industry. So um, basically, you have to kind of like leverage who you know, what you know, and your connections, and you have to have good timing. And um, good timing isn't essential, but good timing is essential in photography, actually. So yeah, that's how I became one. How do I find second shooters these days? I you know I have a few second shooters that and freelancers that I use consistently. So I have a team, and they're pretty flexible for the most part. Um, but if I'm looking, I'm always looking. I'm always open to work with new folks. I would rather actually work with people that aren't very familiar with, and aren't like dead set in their ways, their own way of shooting. So, the less on a not a technical aspect, because everybody should be sound technically in terms of like how their camera works, and the basics of photography, right? Like that's a given. That's an obvious thing. That shouldn't even be something that should be mentioned. I'll talk in another video about um, what makes a good second shooter, or to like how to up your value, and to become more of an asset as a second shooter to your main shooter, because I think that's important. But I've found second shooters through like Facebook. Um, I wouldn't recommend it. I've had some not bad luck with finding folks on Facebook, but finding good shooters is tough, man. And I think maybe if you emphasized certain things like not being flaky and being really passionate about your career as a photographer, and not just photography as a genre in general, um, and how I think maybe if you can get across how serious you are about it, and then it's not just like, oh, I'm doing it to get girls, or I'm doing it for like my YouTube channel or Instagram cloud or whatever dumb shit um, people have reasons for, right? Like you don't want that, obviously. But you want to emphasize to your potential employer that you're not that, right? That you're in it for the long haul. You're not in there to like just hit it and quit it and learn and become the competition, right? Because that's what a lot of photographers are afraid of is, teaching you what they know and then um, going your own way, which is, something, like that's something that I think like every photographer has done at one point or another, right? Like they learn and then they move on. Like that's just a way of living and learning and making money, right? That's, yeah. I guess that's another video. That's a subject for another video. Uh, yeah, Facebook. I guess that's a subject for another video too. Is Facebook photographer horror stories. Clients, friends, and family. They've reached out sometimes. Even guests at weddings or guests at events. They've reached out to me afterwards about working together. Um, Having a network of photographers is good. I don't have a huge network of other photographers other than the ones that I employ, um, mainly because I just don't like to. I think it's important to have people in the industry that you know and that you're colleagues with and that you have respect for, but I don't necessarily think you have to have friends. Your photographer peers might eventually become friends, but I don't really search out photography communities, mainly because I feel like a lot of it is very toxic or um, not productive to me. Um, what is that saying? Comparison is the thief of joy. I think one of the Roosevelts said that. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt. He said, comparison is the thief of joy. And so when you're in those photography communities, it's like you can't help but feel envious because everybody's like putting out their best game, and everybody's talking about like how successful they are and how booked they are, and it gets depressing, man, if you're not in that same boat, right? If you're not like high fiving and you're like, yeah, man, me too, right? Like it gets depressing. So, um, it's like a pissing contest. It's like who can piss the furthest, who can piss the farthest, right? Like oh, what gear do you have, and like oh, I use this and I use that and you should use it. It's like I don't give a shit, honestly. Like I do what I like doing, what works for me, and you know um, there's been random occurrences where I'll meet somebody who has a camera and we'll strike up a conversation, and I'll end up taking their information down and contacted them and working with them in the future. And sometimes that's worked out, and other times that's been like a disaster, right? So it's you have to be willing to take that risk because sometimes you can find that diamond in the rough and mold them to like how exactly you want that photographer to be in terms of like how they're like working, in terms of how their philosophy and how they work. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. All right. Hopefully somebody got something out of it. So see ya.